Hello, my wonderful third graders. I hope you're having a fantastic day. We are still in Domain Unit 5, Light and Sound. This is Lesson 6, Qualities of Sound. We learned what sound was yesterday, and now we're going to learn a little more about it. Some words you'll hear throughout the read aloud. An audiologist is a doctor who studies hearing and how to help people with hearing loss. Composing is a verb, it's something that you can do. Creating or writing, arranging. Device, a piece of equipment designed for a specific purpose. Frequency, the rate at which sound waves are produced, the number of times something happens within a particular period of time. A hearing aid is a device that is worn in the ear of a person who has difficulty hearing, used to make sounds louder. Maybe someone you know who has a hard time hearing uses a hearing aid to help them. Intensity, it's a noun. The measured strength of light and sound, the amount of energy or power something has. Pitch is the quality of a sound as high or low. Maybe you've heard about pitch in music class. Okay, so what have we learned already? Which of the characters is teaching us about sound? Which character? That's right. Jack Otteray is teaching us about sound because he really likes music. What is sound? Right? Sound is an energy, just like light is an energy, and it also travels through waves, but they have to vibrate on particles, whereas light travels better where there's not particles. Sound travels best where there's lots of particles, where there's lots of things in the way for it to vibrate. What are some sources of sound? Voices, banging, alarms, ringing cars, so many things that are sources of sound. All right, like I said, light and sound are different because they travel at different speeds, and light works best in a vacuum, and sound doesn't work at all in a vacuum because there's no particles. And they're similar because they are both energies that travel in waves. Remember, our characters are in New York City. They went on a tour around Manhattan, and now it looks like they're going to eat some ice cream. The children had a great time on the boat tour of Manhattan. They admired the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, and the Brooklyn Bridge, and especially enjoyed waving to passengers on other boats that passed them. Once they were back on land, Samuel insisted that they all have ice cream. No one protested. They stood on the edge of the curb as Samuel waved his cane in the air in the hopes of attracting a taxi. "It looks like you're planning to attack someone with this large stick," Jack exclaimed. Both Amy and Ethan burst out laughing. "I'm trying to hail a taxi," Samuel explained. "Well, I don't know if I would stop," yelled Jack. "I think I would fear for my life." Nevertheless, after a few minutes of cane waving, a taxi slowed to a halt. The driver poked his head out of the window and asked, "Where to?" "The Lincoln Center," Jack replied. Do you all know much about Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty and why they are significant? Ellis Island was the first place of entry for many immigrants into the United States. So people who immigrated, who came from other countries to come live in the United States, they used to have to stop on Ellis Island. Before there were planes and different ways of getting in, they'd stop with their boats. And then the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of the United States and of freedom for people immigrating into the country. It was a gift to the United States from France. Jack had arranged for them to attend an afternoon concert at the Lincoln Center. They were going to listen to an orchestra made up of young musicians from all over the United States. After the concert, they were going to have dinner before catching the train home. The traffic seemed to be moving a little faster than it had been earlier in the day. Before they knew it, they had arrived at their destination. Once again, they paid the taxi driver and piled out of the cab. Immediately, Jack took charge and led them toward an impressive building known as Avery Fisher Hall. Inside the main door, Jack collected 4 tickets from the box office, and after showing the tickets to a member of the staff, they were handed programs and directed to their seats. So this is a photograph of Lincoln Center on the left. How would you describe how the artist chose to portray the Lincoln Center in this image? What is similar? What is different? What do you see? You can see the fountain and the tall, pretty buildings. One thing I don't see in the illustration is the design on the ground that you can see in the photograph. Jack had bought tickets in the first balcony to the left of the stage. They sat down together in the comfortable plush seats and took in the beautiful sights and sounds of the famous concert hall. "What sort of music will we hear?" asked Ethan. "The musicians are going to play music from well-known movies. I think you'll enjoy it, Ethan," explained Jack. "Which movies?" asked Amy. "Take a look in the program," advised Samuel. "There you will find the titles of all the pieces being played today. Amy and Ethan immediately began to scour the pages of the program. Those are some really good seats they got there, really close to the stage. Turning to the children, Jack said, "As you know, I am a musician who has been composing and playing combinations of carefully arranged music notes most of my life. Each musical note has a particular sound. When you combine these sounds successfully, the end result is a perfectly harmonious musical composition." "So music is like the gift of sound," Ethan mused. "That's a nice way to think about it," Amy replied. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small hearing aid and placed it inside his left ear. "Jack, I didn't know you used a hearing aid," Amy said. "Yes, the audiologist I went to see gave this device to me. I should use it more than I do," replied Jack. "Today I want to make sure that can hear these wonderful musicians." "He doesn't wear it when I'm talking to him," announced Samuel. "What would be the point of that?" joked Jack. He was no longer yelling. It was clear that the hearing aid was helping him to hear. So in the illustration, you can see that Jack is thinking about himself when he was younger and he was a musician. Apparently, he played the violin. That's pretty cool. What is the word Jack used to describe the written piece of music? Composition. What root word is in composition? Right? Compose. So like a composer composes a composition. A hearing aid is a small device or piece of special equipment that is worn in the ear to make sounds louder so a person can hear better. There you see the orchestra with the conductor in the front. Before long, it was time for the concert to begin. The lights began to dim, the musicians appeared, the conductor took his place, and the sound of music burst forth into the air. The orchestra played a number of well-known pieces. Amy and Ethan recognized some of them from their favorite movies. They watched and listened intently as the musicians played. After about 45 minutes, the lights in the concert hall brightened for the intermission, and people began to stretch their legs and wander out into the atrium or entrance hall. So an intermission is a special break in a concert or a show in the middle so people can take a break and get something to eat or use the bathroom. You can see the sound waves coming from these instruments. Jack pointed to the violinist who was adjusting the tightness of the strings on his instrument. "Have I ever explained to you how my favorite instrument, the violin, works?" asked Jack. "The strings of the violin determine how high or how low it sounds. The thickness, tightness, and length of the strings all make a difference in the kind of sound it makes." "I love when you play the violin," said Amy, smiling. "What's that instrument called, Jack?" Ethan asked curiously, pointing to a large brass instrument toward the back of the orchestra. "Oh, the tuba, another one of my favorites," exclaimed Jack with pleasure. The musician blows on the mouthpiece to produce the vibrations inside the instrument. His fingers press the valves or buttons on the tuba. This changes the length of the tube through which the air flows. "Let me guess," cried Amy. "The length of the air tube makes the sound lower or higher." "You would make a fine musician," beamed Jack. "Or maybe a scientist," Amy responded proudly. So the violin is classified as a member of the string family of instruments. Do you all know any other stringed instruments? Like a guitar, a harp, a banjo, a ukulele, a bass? There's lots of stringed instruments. Whereas the tuba is classified as a brass instrument. Are you familiar with any other brass instruments? There's the French horn, the trumpet, the trombone. Oh, what instruments do we have here? Look at this illustration. Can you see a difference in the sound waves between the two drums? What do you think is making them different? Look at the sticks that are being used, the drumsticks. "This might sound like a silly question," said Amy, "but what makes sound loud or soft?" "That's not a silly question at all," replied Jack. "You see, the loudness or softness of a sound is caused by the amount of energy being carried in the vibration. The greater the intensity or power of a sound wave, the louder the sound. Think about the difference between a drum that is tapped lightly and one that is struck very hard. When the drummer taps lightly, there is less energy applied to the drum. Less energy means lower intensity and a softer sound. When the same drum is struck with greater intensity, the sound has higher intensity and it's loud." So that's why. So if either stick, if they struck harder, they would get a louder sound. More intensity would give a louder sound. "I see," said Ethan. "I have another question. What is pitch?" "I heard that word in music class, but I didn't know what it meant," Ethan continued. "Another excellent question," said Jack. "In order to explain that, let me go back a step or two. When an object vibrates, such as the top of a drum, it does not produce just one sound wave, but many sound waves per second. The faster something vibrates, the shorter the wavelengths it produces. For example, the top of a larger drum vibrates more slowly than the top of a smaller drum. The tightness and thickness of the top of the drum makes a difference too." Jack took a breath and Samuel jumped in. "If the sound waves have a short wavelength, there are many waves per second. If the waves have a long wavelength, there are fewer waves per second." Amy and Ethan giggled as Jack glared at Samuel. "The rate at which sound waves are produced is known as the frequency of sound," resumed Jack. Amy nodded. "I see, so a sound with a long wavelength and fewer waves gets per second, like the sound produced by the larger drum, has a lower frequency, whereas one with a short wavelength and more waves per second, like the sound produced by the smaller drum, has a higher frequency." "Exactly," said Jack. "And to answer your first question, pitch describes how high or low a sound wave sounds." "Oh, I understand now," said Amy cheerily. "High-frequency sound waves have high pitches, and low-frequency sound waves have low pitches. That must be why the violin, which is small and has short strings, has a higher pitch than a stand-up bass, which is huge with much longer strings." "So, the sound of a bird chirping is a high-pitched sound, but the sound of a cow mooing is a low-pitched sound," burst in Ethan, who was now mooing loudly like a cow. "Moo, moo, moo." "You've got it," said Jack. "Vibrations and sound waves cause sounds with different qualities." Which instrument would produce higher frequency vibrations? The violin, right? Because it has smaller strings. Would it have a higher or a lower pitch than the bass? It would have a higher pitch than the bass. Before long, the musicians and the conductor returned to the stage. Samuel, Jack, Amy, and Ethan sat back and enjoyed the rest of the concert. Each musical composition created an atmosphere of its own. The audience listened attentively and applauded enthusiastically, especially when the better-known pieces were played. Music from well-known superhero movies, fantasy movies, and Disney movies were particularly well received. The music recreated musical images or magical images and brought back memories for each member of the audience. When the concert was over, Samuel and Jack took the children to their favorite Italian restaurant. The restaurant was less than a block from the concert hall, and the four laughed and joked as they walked to the restaurant and talked about their favorite parts of the concert. "I wish we could have brought Alfie to this city," said Ethan eagerly. Jack shook his head. "Alfie would have gone crazy. You know all those loud sounds we heard today? He would have heard even more sounds." "What do you mean?" asked Amy. "Well, have you ever seen someone using a dog whistle? A dog whistle produces a very high sound. The frequency is so high that we cannot hear it, but dogs can. Alfie is able to hear a greater range of sounds, higher pitched sounds and lower pitched sounds than we can hear. As with light, some wavelengths or frequencies cannot be sensed by humans." "Oh, wow," said Ethan. "Maybe that's why Alfie can always hear a thunderstorm coming before we do. The storm must produce vibrations that are too low for us to hear." "Yep," said Jack. Over dinner, Samuel and Jack recalled how they too had been taken on a trip to the city when they were young. "When we were in the 4th grade, your grandfather's father took us to a concert at Carnegie Hall. That was the day I decided that I wanted to be a professional musician," recalled Jack. Samuel smiled. "I remember that day as if it were yesterday," he said. Jack smiled too. "My life was never the same after that experience." All right, what is the setting throughout most of this read aloud? Where are they? They're mostly at Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center in New York City. What are some adjectives and other words you could use to describe this setting? Large space, beautiful, crowded, exciting, dim lights, elegant. What are some sources of sound Jack, Samuel, Ethan, and Amy heard inside the concert hall at the Lincoln Center? Lots of different sounds. The applause of the audience, instruments being tuned up, the orchestra playing, music, voices, violins, bass, the different instruments. How would you describe these sounds? How would you describe them? Some of them were loud. Most of them were loud, right? Some of them had high pitch, some of them had low pitch. How does the frequency of sound waves affect the pitch of a sound? High frequency sound waves have a higher pitch or higher sound. Low frequency sound waves have a lower pitch or lower sound. What are some examples of high pitched sounds? Birds tweeting, babies crying, a whistle, a violin playing. This would be a high pitched sound, right? What are some examples of low-pitched sounds? Growls, cows moving, low bass, or tuba being blown. Something really, really, really low. What is intensity? Energy or power. So high energy, high power would be high intensity. Maybe someone's saying, "Man, you're being really intense right now." They probably mean that you have lots of energy. What is an example of a high-intensity sound? A jackhammer or loud music. What is an example of a low-intensity sound? A whisper, the rustling of leaves. Very low intensity. Not much vibration is coming from it. Describe how pitch, frequency, and intensity affect the qualities and variations of sounds that we hear. Well, it changes what we hear, right? You might hear something that's high intensity that would probably hurt your ears, especially, or if it's high pitched, right? It'd be a very high, loud sound. Whereas low intensity would be a quieter sound, right? Maybe find a quieter bass sound soothing. Look at this illustration. What is the effect of someone hitting a drum? What happens when someone hits a drum? The cause is someone hitting the drum. What is the effect? Well, someone, depending on their intensity, is going to hit the drum and it's going to vibrate, right? The effect of a soft hit, very low intensity, is not much vibration. So there's not going to be intensity in the sound. It's not going to be as loud. Whereas if you have high intensity, when you hit it hard, then the sound is going to be high intensity, a high frequency. It's going to be loud. If you could only perceive light or sound, which would you choose and why? Interesting question. Interested to read your answers. Our word for today is frequency. In the read aloud you heard, the rate at which sound waves are produced is known as the frequency of sound. Say the word frequency. The frequency of sound is how often sound waves are produced. Some waves can have a high frequency or a low frequency. Frequency also means the number of times something happens within a particular period of time. Tobias knew that the sound of the jet engine had a high frequency because it was producing many sound waves in a short period of time. All right, good job, third graders. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about sound.